Welcome back to the deep dive. Um, sometimes history throws you these curveballs. Stories packed with twists and turns that leave you wondering, like, how did I not know about this? And today, we're diving into one of those stories. The short but impactful life of King Edward VI. We all know about Henry VIII, right?
Hmm.
And his infamous 6 wives. But what about the son who inherited the throne? A 9-year-old boy crowned King of England.
Yeah. It's a story that often gets overshadowed, lost in the shadow of these larger-than-life Tudor figures.
Oh,
But believe me, Edward's reign, brief as it was, really had a lasting impact on England.
hmm.
And the dynamics that he had with all the powerful women in his life, his sisters Mary and Elizabeth, his stepmother Catherine Parr, even his cousin Lady Jane Grey, well, let's just say it's a story worthy of, a Tudor drama.
It sounds like it.
But
And thankfully, we've got a treasure trove of sources to help us unravel it all. Historical accounts, letters, and even Edward's own diary.
yeah,
Really a unique document for its time. So are you ready to step back in time with me and explore the world of the boy king and the women who outlived him?
absolutely. Let's dive in.
Okay, so let's rewind to the very beginning. Imagine the anticipation, the excitement in England. 1537. Henry VIII, after years of yearning for a male heir, finally has his prayers answered.
Oh, the celebrations, I bet, were just off the charts. After so many marriages, annulments, Edward's birth was seen as a sign of, divine favor, a guarantee for the future of the Tudor dynasty. And to think, just days after his birth, his mother, Jane Seymour, tragically passes away. You know what a beginning marked by both joy and sorrow.
Right, it's almost Shakespearean, isn't it? A king gets his longed-for son only to lose the queen in the process.
Yeah.
And it sets the stage for Edward to be raised, as he later wrote in his diary, among the women.
Interesting.
So what was his childhood like growing up in the shadow of such a monumental event?
Well, from what we can gather, it was a childhood of contrasts. On one hand, you have the privilege, lavish gifts from his sisters, Mary and Elizabeth, the entertainment. Imagine acrobats and bears performing for this young prince. It sounds like, something out of a storybook.
But I'm guessing it wasn't all sunshine and games, right?
No, of course not. I mean, the loss of his mother at such a tender age undoubtedly left a mark. And then there was the rigorous education, steeped in the principles of the Protestant Reformation. And you have to remember, this is a time of just huge religious upheaval in England. Henry VIII's break from Rome, the establishment of the Church of England, all of this forms the backdrop of Edward's upbringing.
So right from the start, religion plays a pivotal role in his life.
Yeah.
And I imagine this had a significant impact on his relationships with his sisters, particularly Mary, a devout Catholic.
Absolutely. The sources paint a really fascinating picture of their evolving dynamic. Initially, there's a lot of affection between them. Mary, much older, doted on Edward, showered him with gifts and attention. But as Edward grew older and his Protestant convictions solidified, tensions arose. And we even see instances where Edward directly challenges Mary's faith, even criticizing her, like in front of his council. Oof.
Oh, wow. That must have made for some awkward family dinners. It seems like religion wasn't just a matter of personal belief for Edward. It was intertwined with his sense of duty, his vision for England's future.
Precisely. And this brings us to his relationship with Elizabeth. While not as openly antagonistic as with Mary, Edward's Protestant leanings eventually led him to question her legitimacy as well. Remember, Henry VIII went to great lengths to ensure a clear succession, and Edward, in his really strict adherence to these acts, he viewed both of his sisters as potential threats to the stability of Protestant rule.
So his upbringing, his education, it really shapes his entire worldview. It influences even his closest family bonds. It's almost like he's putting the crown before blood.
Mm.
But wasn't there another woman, though, that played a significant role in his life? His stepmother, Catherine Parr.
Ah, yes, Catherine Parr. What's fascinating about their relationship is that it seems to have been genuinely warm and affectionate. He referred to her as his most dear mother. And she was a woman of intellect, reformist leanings herself. She even supervised the publication of a book promoting Protestantism.
Oh, wow. It sounds like she was a significant influence on the young king. And given that he was surrounded by these strong, intelligent women, I can't help but wonder how much their presence shaped his views on women in general,
Hmm.
especially in a time when, patriarchy was the norm.
Hmm. That's a really intriguing question. I mean, it's clear that Edward lived in a world where men held the reins of power. But his close relationships with these women, they suggest a more nuanced picture. Perhaps their influence fostered a certain level of respect. an understanding of their intellectual capabilities, even if it didn't necessarily translate to a complete rejection of the prevailing patriarchal views of the time.
Yeah, it's certainly a topic worth pondering. But before we get too deep into analyzing Edward's views on women, let's address the elephant in the room, or rather, the looming question that hung over his entire reign: the succession.
Ah, yes, the succession crisis. A young king with no heir, two sisters whose legitimacy he'd questioned, and the weight of the Protestant Reformation on his shoulders. What a predicament.
Like something straight out of a historical thriller. So what happened next?
Well, this is where things take a dramatic turn. Edward, even as a teenager facing a fatal illness, most likely tuberculosis, makes a bold, even audacious decision. He decides to bypass both Mary and Elizabeth and instead names Lady Jane Grey, his cousin, as his heir.
Hold on, his cousin. That's unexpected, and wouldn't that directly contradict his father's will?
It absolutely did. It was a risky move bordering on, treasonous. But Edward was adamant. He saw Mary's potential Catholic reign as a threat to everything he'd worked for, everything he believed in, and he was willing to take really drastic measures to prevent it.
So a dying teenager throws a wrench into the entire line of succession, setting the stage for, well, what exactly? I have a feeling this is just the beginning of the story.
You are absolutely right. Edward's decision to name Lady Jane Grey as his heir set off a chain reaction that would plunge England into years of religious and political turmoil. But to unpack all of that, we'll need to delve into the aftermath of this bombshell decision. And that's a story, well, for part 2 of our deep dive.
Stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back after a short break. Just kidding. We don't do breaks here on the deep dive. Let's just jump right into part 2. Okay, so we left off with Edward's dramatic decision to name Lady Jane Grey as his heir, a move that directly challenged his father's will and set the stage for this power struggle of epic proportions. So what happened next? Did this teenage king's gamble pay off?
Well, not exactly. You see, even with the force of Edward's will behind it, Lady Jane Grey's reign was incredibly short-lived. I mean, we're talking a mere 9 days.
9 days. That's barely enough time to settle into the throne, let alone rule a kingdom. What went wrong?
Well, it's a complex mix of factors, but essentially Mary, with her staunch Catholic supporters, had a much stronger claim to the throne and a greater degree of, popular support. So she rallied her forces, marched on London, and ultimately seized power, deposing poor Lady Jane Grey in the process.
And what about Elizabeth? Where was she during all of this?
Elizabeth was in a really precarious position, you see. She had to tread carefully, balancing her own ambitions with the need to avoid, being seen as a threat to either Mary or Lady Jane Grey. So ultimately, she chose to support Mary, a decision that proved, pretty wise in the long run.
So Mary takes the throne, Catholicism is restored in England, and Lady Jane Grey, well, what becomes of her?
Tragically, she was imprisoned and later executed, a stark reminder of the high stakes involved in all these power struggles. And Mary, despite her initial popularity, she soon earned the nickname Bloody Mary for her harsh persecution of Protestants. It was a really turbulent time marked by just religious strife and political intrigue.
So it sounds like Edward's attempt to secure a Protestant future for England backfired, spectacularly. But then, of course, we have Elizabeth eventually ascending to the throne, ushering in her legendary reign and solidifying Protestantism in England. It's almost as if Edward's actions unintentionally paved the way for his sister's success.
That's a really interesting perspective. Yeah, you could argue that Edward, in his unwavering commitment to the Protestant cause, he set in motion a chain of events that ultimately led to the very outcome he desired, albeit through, a rather circuitous and tragic route.
Right. It's those unexpected twists and turns that make history so captivating, isn't it? But in the midst of all this drama, where does Edward himself fit in?
Yeah.
He dies young, his grand plan falls apart, and yet he's still remembered. What's his legacy?
It's a good question. Edward's often overshadowed by these larger-than-life figures of his father and his sisters, but his reign, though short, was really a pivotal one. He oversaw significant religious reforms, helped establish the Church of England as we know it today, and left behind a wealth of writings, including, his famous diary, which offers a unique window into the mind of a young king navigating a world in flux.
Speaking of his diary, I'm so curious to delve into that. You mentioned earlier that it's quite different from what you might expect. So what makes it so unique?
Well, for starters, it's considered the first private diary of an English or even a European king. That in itself is a remarkable feat. But what's even more fascinating is the content. It's not a tell-all filled with juicy gossip or heartfelt confessions. Instead, it's this meticulous chronicle of Edward's daily life, his observations of the court, his thoughts on, politics and religion.
So instead of teenage angst, we get detailed accounts of diplomatic meetings and theological debates.
Pretty much, yeah. It's incredibly detailed, almost to the point of being dry at times. But for historians, it's an invaluable resource. It provides us with, insights into Edward's personality, his intellectual development, his understanding of the world around him.
It must be fascinating to just read history unfold through the eyes of the king himself. Are there any particular entries that stand out, that give us a glimpse into the person behind the crown?
Absolutely. One that always strikes me is the very first entry. Imagine a young boy, just a few days into his reign, recording in his diary, in a matter-of-fact tone, the death of his mother.
Wow. That's heartbreaking. It really underscores the weight of responsibility he carried at such a tender age. It makes you wonder, you know, about the emotional toll it must have taken on him.
Precisely. You have this boy who's lost his mother. He's thrust into a role that he could never have prepared for. He's surrounded by these advisors vying for power, facing, life or death decisions. And yet he maintains this remarkable composure, at least in his writing. It makes you question how much he allowed himself to feel, to express his emotions.
It's almost like he was compartmentalizing, separating the personal from the political, the boy from the king. But even in his most formal entries, there are glimpses of his personality, his sharp intellect, his unwavering convictions.
Exactly. You see flashes of his wit, his dry humor, even his frustration with those who disagreed with him. And there are moments, too, where he's deep religious faith shines through, shaping his understanding of events, influencing his decisions.
It sounds like his diary offers this complex and fascinating portrait of a young king grappling with immense challenges, both personal and political. And it's a reminder that history isn't just about, dates and battles. It's about people, their lives, their struggles, their triumphs.
Couldn't agree more. And Edward's story, despite its, tragic end, is a testament to the enduring power of human resilience. The capacity to face adversity with courage and conviction.
So we've talked about Edward's upbringing, his complex relationships with the women in his life, his controversial decision to, alter the line of succession, and all the tumultuous events that followed. But before we wrap up our deep dive, I want to circle back to something we touched upon earlier. Edward's views on women.
Yes. The question of how this young king, raised among the women, perceived the fairer sex. It's a tricky one, isn't it? Especially given, the patriarchal context of his time.
Exactly. On one hand, we see him challenging his sister's legitimacy, making decisions that ultimately disempowered them. But on the other hand, he had these close, affectionate relationships with his stepmother, Catherine Parr, and even, his cousin, Lady Jane Grey.
It's a puzzle, isn't it? And I'm not sure there's a simple answer. It's possible that Edward, despite the limitations of his time, he recognized the intellectual capabilities of women, even admired their strength and resilience.
But perhaps as a king, he felt bound by the traditional notions of male authority, like the societal expectations that dictated a woman's place.
That's certainly a possibility. Or maybe it was a combination of both. A genuine respect for the women in his life, coupled with a, pragmatic understanding of the political realities that he faced.
It seems like the more we delve into Edward's story, the more complex and nuanced he becomes. He wasn't just a puppet king, a pawn in the games of powerful women.
Right.
He was a young man with his own ideas, his own convictions, his own struggles.
Absolutely. And his story serves as a powerful reminder that even those who seem like, minor players on the historical stage, they can have a profound impact on the course of events.
And that history itself is rarely black and white. It's this tapestry woven from countless threads, individual lives intertwined, choices made, consequences unforeseen.
Beautifully put. And as we conclude our deep dive into the life of Edward VI, I think it's fitting to leave our listeners with a question, something to ponder as they reflect on this young king's legacy. Imagine, if you will, that Edward had lived a full life, a long reign. How would his rule have unfolded? What mark would he have left on England?
Would he have become a tyrant like his father, a reformer, a visionary leader? It's a tantalizing what if, a reminder that history is filled with, possibilities, both realized and unrealized. And that even in the face of fate's, cruel hand, the human spirit can strive for greatness. leaving behind a legacy that resonates across the centuries.
Yeah.
It really makes you wonder how different the Tudor dynasty might have been. Would we even be talking about the reigns of Mary and Elizabeth in the same way if Edward had, lived a full life?
Right.
It's a reminder that even the seemingly, less prominent figures in history can hold a surprising amount of influence over the trajectory of events.
Yeah.
And speaking of influence, I think it's worth revisiting Edward's relationship with his sisters one last time, Mary and Elizabeth.
Yes. This complex dynamics. It's easy to view Edward through a modern lens.
Right.
And judge his actions toward his sisters, particularly his attempts to exclude them from the line of succession. But it's important to remember the historical context, the pressures that he faced as a young king entrusted with the future of a nation in the throes of religious upheaval.
Absolutely. He was a product of his time,
Yeah.
steeped in the fervor of the Protestant Reformation, viewing the Catholic Church as a threat to England's spiritual and political well-being. And his sisters, by virtue of their birth and religious convictions, represented that very threat.
Yeah, it's a clash of ideology, isn't it? Edward, driven by his fervent belief in the Protestant cause, saw his sisters as obstacles to this divinely ordained path that he believed England should follow.
It's almost tragic in a way.
Yeah.
These siblings bound by blood, a shared history, yet torn apart by the ideological forces that were reshaping their world. And yet, there's also a sense of pragmatism in Edward's actions, like a recognition that the stability of the realm required a clear and unwavering commitment to the Protestant faith. He may have loved his sisters, but he loved England more, and he saw their potential reigns as a threat to the very fabric of the nation.
Right.
It's a reminder that history is rarely a neat and tidy affair. It's messy, it's complex, and it's driven by individuals grappling with, conflicting loyalties, personal ambitions, deeply held beliefs.
Yeah, and sometimes it's those internal conflicts, those agonizing decisions made in the face of impossible choices that shape the course of history in the most profound ways.
And speaking of agonizing decisions, I can't help but think about Edward's decision to name Lady Jane Grey as his heir. It was a bold move, a gamble that ultimately failed. But it speaks volumes about his determination, his willingness to defy convention in pursuit of his vision for England.
Absolutely. And it's a testament to his political acumen,
Yeah.
his understanding of the levers of power, even at, such a young age. He may have been surrounded by advisors, but the decision to alter the line of succession, to risk everything on this audacious plan, ultimately rested with him.
It's a reminder that even those who seem like pawns in the grand game of history can at times exert their own agency, make choices that have far-reaching consequences, and that history itself is not, fixed, immutable narrative, but rather a fluid and ever-evolving tapestry woven from the actions, both grand and seemingly insignificant, of countless individuals.
It's a humbling thought, isn't it?
It is, that even a 9-year-old boy thrust into the role of king could leave such an indelible mark on the world.
And Edward's story, despite its brevity, it continues to fascinate and intrigue historians to this day. He was a king, a reformer, a tragic figure, and ultimately a reminder that even the most, fleeting lives can have a lasting impact on the course of history.
Well said.
Yeah.
And for our listeners out there who are eager to, delve deeper into the world of Edward VI, I highly recommend checking out his diary. It's a fascinating glimpse into the mind of a young king grappling with weighty decisions, navigating a world on the cusp of change, and ultimately striving to leave his mark on history.
Yeah, it's a testament to his intellect, his piety, and his unwavering commitment to his vision for England. And it serves as a powerful reminder that history is not just a collection of dry facts and dates, but a, vibrant tapestry woven from the lives, the struggles, and the triumphs of individuals who, like Edward VI, dared to shape the world around them.
Well, on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the life and legacy of Edward VI, the boy king who ruled England for a fleeting moment, but left an indelible mark on the course of history. Thank you for joining us on this journey of discovery. We'll be back soon with another fascinating exploration of a forgotten corner of history. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those historical fires burning.